Most productivity advice sounds convincing because it is internally consistent. It assumes a world where work arrives in predictable blocks, priorities are stable, and focus can be protected with enough discipline. Now, in that world, the advice works. You plan your day, protect deep work, minimize interruptions, and measure progress through visible output. Effort aligns neatly with results, and improvement feels achievable through the sheer habit alone. The problem is that many real jobs don't operate in that world, and this is where most of us give up. As someone who's been a manager for over 2 decades, I can share with you strategies for staying productive in the most chaotic of all environments, our jobs. If you've ever felt guilty for not being as productive as you wanted to be, well, this episode is for you. My name is Marcel. I'm a chartered manager and I'm a big fan of productivity hacks, but I always take them with a pinch of salt. After all, planning your day in 3 neat buckets can't survive your kids, your dog, your boss calling panicked about the latest business opportunity, and everything else that happens in real life. The reality is that we all operate in environments shaped by people, systems, and uncertainty. Work arrives unexpectedly, priorities shift, decisions depend on others. Emergencies override plans, and attention is pulled in multiple directions, often for reasons that are genuinely legitimate rather than avoidable. When productivity advice ignores those realities, it creates a gap between expectation and experience. People try to apply the advice faithfully and feel frustrated when it fails. They assume the failure is personal because, well, it must be their fault because the system is perfect. But it rarely is. It's down to the fact best voiced by the famous Prussian general who said that even the best laid plans can't survive contact with the enemy. The world is simply too unpredictable. Much of popular productivity thinking is built around individual contribution. It optimizes for tasks that can be completed independently, measured easily, and repeated consistently. And unless you're a monk isolated somewhere in the mountains, it can feel impossible because that model struggles once work becomes, well, relational, ambiguous, or reactive. In roles where you support others, coordinate work, or respond to changing conditions, the day can't be fully pre-planned. That's something that took me a long time to understand. Interruptions are not distractions from the work. They are the work. They are literally the work. For me, treating those interruptions as failures of discipline created unnecessary guilt and stress. This is particularly evident in operational environments. When systems are live and consequences are immediate, well, responsiveness matters more than perfect focus. Problems demand attention regardless of your schedule. In those contexts, advice that prioritizes uninterrupted blocks of time can feel unrealistic. People end up protecting focus in theory when they are firefighting in practice. That disconnect can become exhausting. Another reason productivity advice breaks down is that it often underestimates decision making. Many systems focus on time allocation without addressing the cognitive load of constant judgment. In short, the more we think, the more tired we become. Choosing what to work on, how much effort to apply, and when to switch tasks requires mental energy. When advice assumes that those choices are obvious or already made, it misses the core challenge. So the next time you hear another LinkedIn guru talking about buckets of attention, and actually these are some really good techniques, just remember that those buckets have different sizes, most have dents, and most likely holes in them too. In short, take it with a pinch of salt. In real jobs, ambiguity is common. Goals are broad and success criteria are fuzzy and trade-offs are unavoidable. Each task requires interpretation before execution. And this is why simple to-do lists can become overwhelming, because they capture tasks but not decisions. They create the illusion of control while leaving the hardest part unresolved. Another mismatch appears around motivation. Productivity advice often assumes some sort of intrinsic motivation and clear ownership. It really breaks down when work depends on collaboration, approval, or alignment. I know that I start most days determined to perform, clear-headed about my goals, all the way down to the time when I have to find a missing coat for my kid that I remember preparing in the evening, or can't find my umbrella. All of a sudden, that motivation pivots into something less tangible. You can't move faster than the slowest dependency. You can't complete work that requires information you don't yet have. No amount of personal optimization removes those constraints, and that is before we even add emotional load as a variable. Because yes, we will get angry, upset, annoyed during the day, all of which drains the focus. Now, when advice ignores these factors, it shifts responsibility unfairly onto the individual. People are encouraged to work smarter in systems that are not really designed to support smart work. The result is frustration disguised as self-improvement. In my experience, there is also a cultural dimension to all of this. Many organizations celebrate busyness while promoting productivity rhetoric. People are encouraged to optimize the time while being rewarded for constant availability, and these two signals conflict. Employees are told to focus deeply, yet they are praised for constant responses. They are encouraged to plan, yet penalized when plans are disrupted by urgent requests. One way of overcoming that is to create timeouts on your calendar for that deep, constructive work. However, it's always easier said than done. This week, I had 3 blocks like that, and I failed on 2 because I simply had to be in those meetings. Actually, it turned out I had to be only in one of them. Navigating those contradictions requires judgment, not just discipline. In my experience, effective productivity in real job is less about perfect routine and a lot more about adaptability. It involves recognizing which advice applies in your context and which doesn't. For example, time blocking can be useful for protecting strategic work, but harmful if it ignores operational realities. Inbox control can reduce noise, but only if priorities are communicated clearly elsewhere. In other words, tools must be applied within systems, not in isolation, and only you can decide what needs to happen. Now, this episode isn't to tell you what systems to apply, but to highlight that all systems need to be applied in a wider context. Don't feel bad if you can't deliver on a particular system. It's not a personal failure, but more often than not, it's a situational one. Now, what I noticed is that the most useful productivity improvement often come from reducing friction rather than increasing output. Clarifying roles, simplifying processes, and defining decision boundaries remove hidden work that no app can fix. And this is why experienced professionals often appear productive without following rigid systems. The effectiveness comes from judgment developed over time. They know where to focus, when to respond, and when to let things wait. That judgment is contextual. It can't be fully captured in generic advice, but believe me when I say this, even those operators have days when everything goes wrong. The danger of productivity culture is that it can make people feel inadequate for failing to meet unrealistic standards. When advice is framed as universal, deviation feels like weakness. A more honest approach recognizes that productivity is situational. What works in calm, controlled environments most likely fails in complex, people-dependent roles. In those roles, success is measured less by how much gets done and more by how well uncertainty is managed. Progress comes from making good decisions under pressure, not from executing a perfect plan. Now, this shift in perspective is liberating because it replaces self-criticism with realism. It allows people to adapt advice rather than abandon it. Okay, let's put it all together. Productivity in real jobs is not about doing more. It's about reducing unnecessary complexity, aligning effort with priorities, and designing work that reflects how it actually unfolds. And when advice acknowledges that reality, well, it becomes supportive rather than prescriptive. It offers principles rather than rules. And when we stop forcing ourselves into systems that don't fit, work starts to feel less like a constant struggle and more like a process that can be shaped deliberately. That is where productivity stops being a personal battle and starts becoming like a shared responsibility. At least that's what I noticed after all those years on the front line of management. If you found this episode helpful, please comment on which aspect of productivity you struggle with most. Let's share some of that pain, and I will see you in the next one.